Welcome to the Explainer. All right, let's jump straight into it because there is a massive paradigm shift happening right now in the AI sector. Honestly, NVIDIA is starting to lose its absolute monopoly to its own customers. And if you're looking for the next leg of the AI boom, it's time to stop buying the brains and start buying the lungs. For the past couple of years, the entire market has been hyper-focused on the software hype, right? The companies designing the silicon. But we're moving incredibly fast out of that speculative software phase and crashing headfirst into an era of brutal industrial reality. So today, we're going to explore what we call the non-magnificent AI play. We're going to look at why the real bottleneck of this boom is no longer about getting your hands on silicon, but rather the actual physical constraints of the electrical grid and thermal management systems. Now, look at this staggering disconnect. 2%. While AI investment has absolutely rocketed to an annualized run rate approaching $725 billion, the United States power grid capacity, well, it's grown by less than 2% over that exact same period. Think about that gap for a second. This massive statistical disconnect is arguably the single most important signal in the entire current investment cycle. It perfectly highlights this wild gap between our digital ambitions and our physical limitations. I mean, writing software and deploying code, you can do that almost instantaneously across a global network. But pouring concrete, laying miles of thick copper wire, physically upgrading electrical substations, that takes years. It takes massive capital, and it takes intense labor. We are quite literally sprinting in the digital realm while crawling in the physical one. So to actually capitalize on this reality, we need to execute a complete 180-degree angle on how we view AI infrastructure. The data heavily suggests a pivot. Stop buying the brains and start buying the lungs. What do I mean by that? Well, the brains are the silicon, the algorithms, the code, all those high-profile tech giants dominating the financial headlines. The lungs are the unglamorous but absolutely essential physical components. We're talking industrial power systems, advanced cooling infrastructure, copper, and steel. Think about a modern AI data center. It's really not just a quiet, air-conditioned room with some computers. It is a sprawling, warehouse-sized industrial fortress. You've got rows upon rows of server racks humming so loudly you literally need ear protection to walk the floor. You have massive industrial chillers pumping thousands of gallons of fluid, and heavy-duty switchgear managing enough electricity to power a small city. At the end of the day, a billion-dollar AI model is completely worthless if the local facility cannot physically pull the required megawatts to plug it in. All right, part one. The AI physical bottleneck, commoditizing the brains. Let's look at how the established tech monopolies are actively being disrupted by their own best customers. We really need to understand what's happening to the brains of the operation before we can fully appreciate the value of the lungs. See, the commoditization of silicon is happening fast. In 2024, roughly 60% of AI workloads were dedicated to training models. Training is the heavy lifting. It's basically like forcing the AI to read the entire internet so it can learn how to think. And this phase heavily favors expensive general-purpose GPUs like the ones NVIDIA makes. But fast forward to 2030, and an overwhelming 90% of demand is projected to shift to inference. Inference is just running the models for end users, answering your prompt, generating an image, and that requires far less raw horsepower. Because of this massive shift, hyperscalers like Amazon, Google, and Meta, who are, ironically, NVIDIA's biggest customers, are aggressively building their own custom, specialized chips tailored specifically for inference. Think Amazon Graviton or the Google TPU. They are essentially turning compute power into a cheap commodity. And this right here is exactly why NVIDIA's projected market share of AI accelerator revenue is expected to drop to 75% by the end of 2025. The core value, the real differentiation in the AI stack, is migrating away from the microchip itself and moving straight into the industrial facility that houses it. Moving on to part two, the grid-strain crisis, a physics bottleneck. Okay, here is the brutal truth of the current market. No matter whose chip wins the compute war, whether it's NVIDIA's Blackwell or Amazon's Trainium, they all face the exact same physical bottleneck, grid strain. Way back in 2007, wait times to connect a new facility to the US power grid averaged around 2 years. Not terrible. But fast forward to the forecast for 2026, and that wait time explodes to 5 to 10 years. In some crucial jurisdictions, it's even worse than that. Right now, there are nearly 2,300 gigawatts of generation and storage capacity basically trapped behind these massive interconnection waitlists in the US alone. To put that staggering number in perspective for you, that trapped capacity exceeds the entire currently installed power capacity of the country. A lot of investors are completely ignoring this. But the reality is, you can own all the custom silicon in the world, but without guaranteed grid access, your state-of-the-art data center is nothing more than an incredibly expensive, very quiet, dark warehouse. And this gridlock isn't just about administrative red tape either. It is a profound supply chain chokehold right in the middle mile. Lead times for custom engineered power transformers have just grown exponentially. Before 2021, a developer could secure one of these massive transformers in maybe 7 to 14 months. Today, that timeline has blown completely out to 24 to 48 months. And remember, these are not off-the-shelf items. You can't just run down to an industrial hardware store to pick one up. It's the difference between buying a standard car directly off the dealership lot versus commissioning a custom-built Formula One engine from scratch. They require highly specialized materials, specifically grain-oriented electrical steel, which is incredibly difficult to source and manufacture right now. The shortage is so severe that manufacturers are literally going back to their clients with year-old purchase orders and saying, hey, we're imposing a 20% price hike just to maintain your delivery schedule. And the most fascinating part? The hyperscalers are just swallowing these hikes without blinking. Why? Because the financial cost of delaying a massive data center launch is far, far worse than paying a premium on electrical steel.
All right, part 3, financial calculus, the alpha in industrials.
So, how does all this hardware and gridlock fundamentally alter the financial calculus for investors? Like, where is the actual durable profit being made in such a constrained environment? Well, first, we have to look at the jaw-dropping capital being deployed by the hyperscalers. These companies are locked in a capital-heavy war just to stay relevant in the AI arms race. Look at these numbers. Meta is burning roughly 44% of its revenue on CapEx. Microsoft is sitting at 39%. Amazon's AWS-focused CapEx accounts for a massive 72% of its corporate total. In 2026 alone, the total expenditure for this group is projected to eclipse $645 billion. That single-year capital expenditure is larger than the entire gross domestic product of countries like Sweden or Argentina. They are engaged in this massive, unprecedented physical build-out, digging trenches, laying fiber, and securing power at quite literally any cost. Now, contrast that staggering hyperscaler spending with where the real alpha is hiding. Fabless chip designers like NVIDIA are historically capital light, but recent market movements show their stock cooling slightly. Meanwhile, industrial infrastructure giants like Caterpillar and Eaton are surging to all-time highs. Why is that? Well, it all comes down to the capex to revenue ratios. Caterpillar and Eaton are only spending roughly 3 to 5% of their revenue on capex. It's the classic gold rush dynamic, right? You don't want to be the prospector spending all your capital desperately digging for gold. You want to be the highly profitable merchant selling the shovels and the pickaxes. These industrial giants don't have to spend hundreds of billions of dollars to compete in the AI race. They are the direct beneficiaries of the hyperscalers' massive spending. They're the ones selling the heavy switchgear, the backup generator turbines, and the physical infrastructure. They're currently priced by the market as traditional cyclical value stocks, but if you look under the hood, they actually boast the aggressive growth profiles of tech firms, and it's all backed by guaranteed 24 to 48-month backlogs of incredibly high-margin orders. Let's move to part 4, thermal survival, buying the AI lungs. Let's pivot to the inside of the facility itself, because the extreme heat generated by these next-generation chips requires an entirely new approach to thermal survival. This is the literal application of buying the lungs. To truly grasp this, we've got to understand the ultimate metric of data center efficiency, power usage effectiveness, or PEU. It's a pretty simple ratio. It's the total amount of energy used by the entire facility divided by the energy that actually makes it to the computing equipment. Think of it kind of like a car's engine efficiency. The absolute perfect PEU score is 1.0, which would mean exactly zero energy is wasted. If your PEU is high, let's say 2.0, it's like having an engine that burns half of its own fuel just to spin its radiator fan to keep from exploding. So the lower your PEU number, the less precious megawattage you're wasting on overhead things like cooling fans, AC units, and air handlers. And remember, when power is your absolute biggest bottleneck, every single fraction of a point on your PEU score translates directly to massive financial savings and actual compute capability. So traditional air cooling has historically operated with a PUE somewhere between 1.4 and 1.8, but we are hitting a hard physical wall here. The heat density of modern AI chips, like NVIDIA's massive new architectures, makes traditional air cooling practically impossible. Trying to cool these new chips with fans is literally like trying to put out a roaring campfire by blowing on it. It just doesn't work.
This is forcing a massive, mandatory transition across the entire industry to liquid cooling systems. This includes direct-to-chip cold plates, or even more radically, full immersion cooling. And full immersion is exactly what it sounds like. It literally involves submerging the entire server rack directly into a bath of engineered, non-conductive fluid. I know it looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie, but it drops that PUE down to an incredibly efficient 1.03. This forced transition isn't just some optional luxury upgrade for these companies, it's a physical necessity for thermal survival, and it's driving unprecedented revenue growth for specialized infrastructure leaders like Vertiv, whose liquid cooling market share is expanding at massive compound annual growth rates.
Part 5. The nuclear bypass and the regulatory jungle. Faced with these extreme power and thermal demands, the tech giants are realizing something terrifying. They simply cannot wait for the public utility grid to catch up. So what are they doing? They're actively sidestepping it. We are officially entering the bring-your-own-generation era. Tech companies are effectively having to transform into energy companies just to bypass those crippling 5 to 10-year grid wait times. The strategic partnerships forming right now are honestly wild. Microsoft and Constellation Energy are spending $1.6 billion to literally resurrect the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant. In an incredibly ironic twist of fate, they are purposely keeping the plant's original 1970s analog control systems. Think about that for a second. The companies building the most advanced, complex, artificial intelligence in human history are actively relying on dumb, physical dials and switches from the disco era because they provide a perfectly air-gapped immunity to modern cyber attacks. It's fascinating. Elsewhere, you have Amazon partnering with Talon at the Susquehanna nuclear site for up to 1.9 gigawatts of power, and Google is aggressively funding next-generation small modular reactors with Kairos Power. It's a complete, desperate scramble for speed to power, using dedicated, carbon-free baseload energy that the public grid just can't supply fast enough. However, as we look at this massive transition, we must impartially observe the fierce regulatory jungle and the local pushback forming on the ground. In Northern Virginia, which is widely considered the epicenter of global data centers, Loudoun County recently eliminated by-right zoning. This is huge because it effectively forces all new data center builds into highly contentious public hearings. The friction between these futuristic tech utopias and the everyday local realities is palpable. Residents are pushing back hard against noise pollution and massive water consumption. To give you an idea of the scale we're talking about, data center cooling systems consumed nearly 2 billion gallons of water in that region alone in 2023. That is an oceanic amount of water being evaporated. Furthermore, everyday residents are facing the prospect of footing the bill for taxpayer-funded grid upgrades. In fact, some estimates suggest Virginia residents might see their personal power bills increase by roughly $300 a year just to pay for the new high-voltage transmission lines required by these tech giants. So data centers are increasingly clashing with local zoning boards and utility regulators, creating a massive, often ignored real-world hurdle for investors who are banking purely on optimistic software projections.
Finally, Part 6. Conclusion: the new industrial imperative.
Okay, let's wrap this explainer up by cementing the physical reality of the AI revolution and what it actually means for the market moving forward. We started by looking at how hyperscalers are commoditizing the brains of the AI operation, shifting from expensive training chips to specialized inference chips. But as we've seen, those chips are absolutely useless without the lungs. The most vital takeaway from all of this data is that the statistical disconnect between massive AI software investment and our physical grid reality is the defining signal of this cycle. We've hit a profound physical wall. The future of artificial intelligence will not just be written in code. It is currently being forged in copper, steel, and industrial coolant. And that physical wall creates a highly durable, highly profitable revenue floor for the industrial equipment providers. I'm talking about the unglamorous companies supplying the custom transformers, the specialized liquid cooling racks, and the baseload power generation. They have quietly become the essential infrastructure of the 21st century. So I want to leave you with this final thought to challenge your perspective on the market's future. The AI arms race is no longer just a theoretical battle of algorithms happening in the cloud. It is a physical, heavy industrial land grab happening in local municipalities and on the electrical grid right now. As hyperscalers burn hundreds of billions commoditizing the brains of AI, and as the digital revolution slams headfirst into the very real physical limits of our power grid, where does the real alpha lie? Are you still just investing in the code, or are you ready to start buying the copper? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time as we continue to unpack the forces shaping our world.